Okay, folks, so I want to share a little bit more information here from this report to the President and Congress, National Weather Modification Policies and Programs from 1979. And before I go into more here, where I picked up, and pick up where I left off here at the advisory. Okay, folks, so I want to read a little bit more from this report to the President and the Congress from 1979, National Weather Modification Policies and Programs. And I had left off here where they were talking about the advisory board report. And before I read more of that, though, I want to go back to one of the appendixes. I'm going to start with Appendix A because it was first referenced in one of the other sections here that I had read the other day. So, and I have the appendixes here. There's Appendix A. And Public Law 94 to 490, October 13th, 1976. Public Law 94 to 490, 94th Congress, an act to authorize and direct the Secretary of Commerce to develop a national policy on weather modification and for other purposes. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that this act may be cited as the National Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976. Section 2, Declaration of Policy. A, Findings. The Congress finds and declares the following. Number 1, weather-related disasters and hazards, including drought, hurricanes, tornadoes, hail, lightning, fog, floods, and frost, result in substantial human suffering and loss of life. I won't argue with them there. Billions of dollars of annual economic losses to owners of crops and other property, and substantial financial loss to the United States Treasury. Number 2, weather modification technology has significant potential for preventing, diverting, moderating, or ameliorating the adverse effects of such disasters. Ameliorating means to like improve on something, make a situation a little bit more tolerable. The adverse effects of such disasters and hazards in enhancing crop production and the availability of water. Number 3, the interstate nature of climatic and related phenomena, the severe economic hardships experienced as a result of occasional drought and other adverse meteorological conditions, and the existing role and responsibilities of the federal government with respect to disaster relief, require appropriate federal action to prevent or alleviate such disasters and hazards. Number 4, weather modification programs may have long-range and unexpected effects on existing climatic patterns which are not confined by national boundaries. May have long-range and unexpected effects, you don't think? Really? B, Purpose. It is therefore declared to be the purpose of the Congress in this act to develop a comprehensive and coordinated national weather modification policy and a national program of weather modification research and development. 1, to determine the means by which deliberate weather modification can be used at the present time to decrease the adverse impact of weather on agriculture, economic growth, and the general public welfare, and to determine the potential for weather modification. 2, to conduct research into those scientific areas considered most likely to lead to practical techniques for drought prevention or alleviation and other forms of deliberate weather modification. 3, to develop practical methods and devices for weather modification. Should never have been normalized. It's ridiculous. Number 4, to make weather modification research findings available to interested parties. To assess the economic, social, environmental, and legal impact of an operational weather modification program. To develop both national and international mechanisms designed to minimize conflicts which may arise with respect to the peaceful uses of weather modification. Oh, what conflicts might that be? You mean like maybe people might have a problem with you poisoning us with your freaking toxic chemicals, maybe? To integrate the results of, sorry folks for that blurt. Number 7, to integrate the results of existing experience and studies in weather modification activities into model codes and agreements for regulation of domestic and international weather modification activities. Section 3, definitions as used in this act. The term secretary means the Secretary of Commerce. The term state means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, or any Commonwealth, territory, or possession of the United States. The term weather modification means any activity performed with which the intention and expectation of producing changes in precipitation, wind, fog, lightning, and other atmospheric phenomena. Section 4, study. The Secretary shall conduct a comprehensive investigation and study of the state of scientific knowledge concerning weather modification, the present state of development of weather modification technology, the problems impeding effective implementation of weather modification technology, and other related matters. Yeah, the problems impeding it. One of the main ones has been they don't have public consent, and they know it. Such study shall include 1. A review and analysis of the present and past research efforts to establish practical weather modification technology, particularly as it relates to reducing loss of life and crop and property destruction. A review and analysis of research needs in weather modification to establish areas in which more research could be expected to yield the greatest return in terms of practical weather modification technology. Number 3, a review and analysis of existing studies to establish the probable economic importance to the United States in terms of agricultural production, energy, and related economic factors if the present weather modification technology were to be effectively implemented. Number 4, an assessment of the legal, social, and ecological implications of expanded and effective research in operational weather modification projects. Yeah. Number 5, formulation of one or more options for a model regulatory code for domestic weather modification activities. Such code to be based on a review and analysis of experience and studies in this area, and to be adaptable to the state and national needs. Interesting, just to be uniform across the board, right? That's why they send out, that's why every meteorologist gets a report from pretty much one source on what their weather's going to be like, right? Yeah. Recommendations concerning legislation desirable to all levels of government to implement a national weather modification policy and program. Yeah. Number 7, a review of the international importance and implications of weather modification activities by the United States. Number 8, a review and analysis of present and past funding for weather modification from all sources to determine the sources and adequacy of funding in the light of the needs of the nation. Number 9, a review and analysis of the purpose, policy, methods, and funding of the federal departments and agencies involved in weather modification and of the existing interagency coordination of weather modification research efforts. Number 10, there's a lot of people on board with this stuff because they need a paycheck, okay? And that's a problem. They need to go and do something else for a living, for real. Anyway, where was I at here? Number 10, is that what I was at? Yeah, a review and analysis of the necessity and feasibility of negotiating an international agreement concerning the peaceful uses of weather modification. Well, you should have considered that before you went around doing what you was already doing a decade before, right? These people. Number 11, formulation of one or more options for a model international agreement concerning the peaceful uses of weather modification and the regulation of national weather modification activities, and a review and analysis of the necessity and feasibility of negotiating such an agreement. Yeah, man, these people are just very sure, very bold, and took a lot of liberties a very long time ago. And truth be told, about a lot of these people developing this crap, and they have developed this crap, a lot of them are either already gone, or they are so damn old, they're as old as dirt, and they don't care, and they'll go out in a bang, for real. They don't care, because they're not going to be around in another 30, 40 years. They really don't care. Anyway, sorry. Okay. Section 5, the report. A, in general, the Secretary shall prepare and submit to the President and the Congress within 1 year after the date of enactment of this act a final report on the findings, conclusions, and recommendations of the study conducted pursuant to Section 4. Such report shall include 1. A summary of the findings made with respect to each of the areas of investigation specified in Section 4. Number 2, other findings which are pertinent to the determination and implementation of a national policy on weather modifications. Number 3, a recommended national policy on weather modification and a recommended national weather modification research and development program which is consistent with and likely to contribute to achieving the objectives of such policy. Yeah, I wish I could do a fancy accent or something that would make this a little more entertaining, huh? Number 4, recommendations for levels of federal funding sufficient to support adequately a national weather modification research and development program. They want your money. Number 5, Recommendations for any changes in the organization and involvement of federal departments and agencies in weather modification which may be needed to implement effectively the recommended national policy on weather modification and the recommended research and development program. Number 6, recommendations for any regulatory and other legislation which may be required to implement such policy and program, or for any international agreement which may be appropriate concerning the peaceful uses of weather modification, including recommendations concerning the dissemination, refinement, and possible implementation of the Model Domestic Code, an international agreement developed under the specifications of Section 4. Each department, agency, and other instrumentality of the federal government is authorized and directed to furnish the Secretary any information which the Secretary deems necessary to carry out his functions under this act. In other words, you better give him all of that information. Hand it all over. Couple more paragraphs, folks. B. Operation and consultation. The Secretary shall solicit and consider the views of state agencies, private firms, institutions of higher learning, and other interested persons and governmental entities in the conduct of the study required by Section 4, and in the preparation of the report required subsection A. Section 6, authorization for appropriations. A. There is authorized to be appropriated to the Secretary for the purpose of carrying out the provisions of this Act not to exceed $1 million. Section 6 of the Act, entitled An Act to Provide for the Reporting of Weather Modification Activities to the Federal Government, approved December 18, 1971, is further amended by striking out 1973, 1974, 1975, 1976, 1977, and inserting in lieu thereof 1973 through 90. That's kind of approved October 13, 1976. So that is the Act, or Appendix A, or referred to as the Act, an Act that was presented in this publication here. And then I have a couple of the other appendices. This is Appendix B, and I'll probably do another video. I can read a little bit more on some of these if it's referenced again, but this is the Appendix B, the Weather Modification Control Act of the state of Illinois. An act to regulate weather modification in this state and amending certain acts therein named in connection therewith, be it enacted by the people of the state of Illinois represented in the General Assembly. Weather Modification Control Act. And I'll read a little bit more into that too, because it is cited further in this particular publication here. And now I'll get back into a little bit more concerning this report to the President and the Congress, National Weather Modification Policies and Programs. The Advisory Board Report. This report agrees with many of the conclusions of the Weather Modification Advisory Board's report set forth in Appendix F. The reports differ in some important respects. And now, let me see, I have Appendix F really quick. I think it's a short one. I think it's just like a single page, I think. Yes. So, this says, Modification Advisory Board's report set forth in Appendix F. The reports differ in some important respects. Okay, and this is Appendix F. The management of weather resources. So they're arguing over who gets to control proposals for a national policy and program. This 229-page document, a report to the Secretary of Commerce from the Weather Modification Advisory Board, accompanies this report as a separate volume. It was published on June 30th, 1978. A limited number of copies are available from the Atmospheric Programs Office. Interesting. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Copies are also for sale by the Superintendent of Documents, U.S. Government Printing Office, Washington, D.C. Yeah, I'm going to have to try to find and look for that again. I tried before, but I'm going to have to try a little bit harder and see if I can't find it. I probably have come across it, I just didn't recognize it. But so that's Appendix F that they refer to here, where they agree with many of the conclusions in that report, but the reports differ in some important aspects. This report concurs with the board that as more effective technologies are developed, the federal government will have principal responsibility for the health, welfare, and safety of the public with respect to the impacts of weather modification because of its interstate implications, and that federal regulation of weather modification operation will be necessary. Yeah, on behalf of the people, right? The board recommends federal licensing of weather modification operators now. This report concludes that the advantages of licensing at this time are small and are outweighed at present by the associated costs of a regulatory scheme. Interesting choice of words. The board recommends creation of an autonomous board. You don't say. with direct authority over the operations of the national program. An autonomous board, huh? This report recommends the establishment of a board to advise the federal agencies preparing and implementing a federal research plan. The board concluded that legislation was desirable to allow class actions against the federal government under the Federal Tort Claims Act for damages caused by federal weather modification experiments. And that legislation might also be required to ensure that federal experiments are not regarded as falling within the exemption from liability in the Federal Tort Claims Act for discretionary functions. This report defers to the Department of Justice's view that class action legislation is not desirable and concludes that, in view of its concerns about changes in the federal government's sovereign immunity status, any legislation with respect to the Discretionary Act exemption should await further experience with its application. Yeah, so in other words, they didn't want it to come down to that because they knew they would not have public consent. They knew people just are not going to be on board with it. The board concluded, it seems probable that a much intensified and steady program of scientific inquiry over the next 2 decades will yield regionally important increases in mountain snowpack in the 1980s, increased rainfall in areas like our high plains and Midwest by the late 1980s, and reduced hurricane winds and hail damage by the 1990s. Well, we'll talk about this, the increased rainfall back in the late 80s. While I believe that it was back in like the mid 80s, 84, 85-ish or so, when Lake Mead was at its highest level, right? So I believe they can control that. They can control that freaking lake like a faucet, folks. Anyway, and reduced hurricane winds and hail damage by the 1990s. This report agrees with the board that modification of the weather in useful ways is scientifically possible. However, this report does not attempt to project specific quantitative research results within given time periods, reflecting less certainty about our ability to predict that the remaining scientific questions will be answered in a specific period. Yeah, they had already had all the answers for a lot of these studies. I'm talking about the recent ones, okay? A lot of these studies have already been done, and they are not allowing all of the information to be published to the public, okay? And I don't think that that's right. They should not be allowed to be drifting classified payloads above our heads for this purpose, for any purpose. Seriously, I have a big problem with them drifting classified payloads around in our skies, and that's what they're doing nowadays, okay? And then this was back, how many years ago? Almost 50 years ago? Over 40 years ago? And if you don't think that they've advanced it and developed it, researched and developed it and advanced it and have been deploying it, you really, 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 again, because I'm repetitive, I'll say it again, you really need to get with the real, because they absolutely have been. And it's gotten to a point now where a lot of these people are saying, well, we've already gone past that point of no return. We warned about it. We knew this day would come. Well, here we are. Now you need us. Because if we stop doing what we're doing, it's going to be way worse than it was before. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. The board concluded that substantially increased levels of funding will be required to support a national research program. This report concludes that only modest funding increases will be required once a new coordinated federal research program is developed by the Weather Modification Subcommittee. The board concluded that all civilian weather modification research and development programs should be centralized in a single federal agency. This report concludes that well-coordinated research and development programs carried out by a number of federal agencies can best achieve advances in weather modification science and technology. Yeah. These differences about the manner in which a federal program is conducted, while significant, should not overshadow this report's agreement with the basic conclusions of the advisory board that modification of the weather in useful ways is scientifically possible. That prudent steps should be taken now to strengthen activities designed to investigate those possibilities, and that these steps require the federal government to develop a coherent, long-term research program and organize seriously for a longer-term effort. There, we were screwed. I started really getting the feds involved in it too. I'm overwhelmed at the number of people who just want to be completely ignorant to the fact that they have been doing this all along. And then they go around and they tell all these fancy stories about 1,000-year storm systems. And you look at the fine print, and you listen very closely to the words that come out of their mouths when they're talking about it. If you listen to them very, very closely and you read their fine print, they will tell you all of that is a theory. It is all just a theory, period. And when they put forth, when they put out information like that and the public just latches right onto it, and the next thing you know, you got all these little parrots saying the same damn thing, all these little tools. I call them tools in their toolboxes. These people in charge of all this stuff going on here in our skies have got all these little tools in their toolboxes that are willing to just go around and spout all of the same bullcrap about 1,000-year storms, and then they give some of these things these really fancy names and these really attractive names, and people go around repeating it, like hole punch clouds and ball lightning, girl of hell. There's nothing glamorous about it. It should have never have been normalized and accepted as normal, folks, period. Anyway, it starts to get into the summary of some of the major findings. I'll do that in another video because this video is already long enough. So, yeah, I'll continue on from this point here. The summary of major findings in this report to Congress from 1979, National Weather Modification Policies and Programs. There's definitely more to go, more to come. Yeah, more to go, too. Yeah, there's more to go. Anyway, thanks for watching. Know that I appreciate it, and any and all eyes are allies.
For us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and in size. It lays the predicate and the foundation for a space communication satellite that will permit the people of the world to see one television program at the same time throughout the world. Think about that kind of communication, and think about the opportunity that will provide. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer, and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control